It is well, it is well with my soul.
Hello, hello, everyone. How are you today? I hope that you're having a great day. Hello, hello. I'm having people that are actually trying to get in the class right now. I want to welcome everybody that is here for the first time. And if you are a student or if you are a friend of mine, or if you just have been in these classes for quite some time now, well, welcome again. And I'm very, very glad that you're here with us today. All right, so let's get started. It is almost, well, I still have 3 minutes, but I'm just gonna go ahead and start. I know that people are gonna continue to come as I am doing the class. We do have our Facebook group. If you're not part of our Facebook group, please be. We have a lot of good information in there. I am actually streaming this live in our Facebook group. The group is called I Do Terra. So if you just go to Facebook and find me in groups section, and you just have to type I Do Terra. Let me go ahead and open my chat in case if people are chatting, so that way I can see your chats. Another thing is that I am a doTERRA wellness advocate with essential oils. I don't know if you guys are familiar or have heard of essential oils, but I have to tell you that doTERRAs are the best in the world. We are taking the lead as far as essential oils go. And all essential oils is natural essences of the plants. That's what essential oils are. And you got to be very careful out there because there are a lot of fake essential oils or synthetic essential oils. doTERRAs are 100% natural, nothing added to them, nothing taken away. So this is really, really important because when we're studying our anatomy and our physiology, we got to understand how our bodies work, but at the same time, how are essential oils, which is natural medicine, working in our bodies. It's not magic that these oils heal us right away. It's not. It is basic science. It is just how our Creator has made us, and it's just how our bodies work. It's facts. So let's go ahead and start. I believe it's 1 minute to 11. So again, we're having these classes every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am Isadora Hafa. I'm a coach. I'm a therapist. I'm an aroma touch technician. I am an essential oil specialist. And pretty soon, I'll be a psychologist. So welcome to my class. I'm very, very glad that you're here with me today. All right, so let's go ahead and start. Today, we're going to be talking about feedback system loops. Core concepts that we're going to be studying today are basically, we're going to identify what is a negative feedback and what is a positive feedback loop. So first things first, feedback system loops. These are cycles of events in which information about the status of condition is continuously being monitored and reported to a central control region, okay? So feedback system loops basically have three components, only three components that we need to understand very, very well today. One is the control center, two, the receptors, and three, the effectors, okay? And we're gonna go into detail on every single one of these three very basic, but very important components. Then also we do have two types of feedback system loops, like I mentioned before. We have the positive and the negative. And we're going to understand what are they and what do they mean. Let's go ahead and just review again what a feedback system loop means. It's basically that system in our bodies that is bringing us back to homeostasis. That's my general definition of it. We constantly are in a battle for balance. Constantly. We are constantly being stressed, even if you don't feel it. We are constantly being on stress. Why? Because our bodies are designed to basically bring us back to that homeostasis stage. So if you're going to some stressful situation, your body is constantly trying to bring you back to that balance, right? Okay, so these are what we call feedback systems or loops, okay? All right. Now, let's go ahead and look into our first component here, which is the control center. The control center receives information about the status of a control condition from a receptor and then determines an appropriate course of action. In most cases, this is located in the brain. I know that if you're new to anatomy and physiology, this means nothing to you. So I'm going to explain it to you, okay? So basically, we have in our bodies controlled conditions. These are basically conditions in our system that we need to have under control. If we don't, we're dead. If we don't have our glucose under control, or glucose levels in our blood under control, you could die. If you don't control your body temperature in your body, you could die. If you don't control your heart rate and it goes out of control, whatever, you can have a heart attack and die. So as you see in our bodies, we constantly have these controlled conditions. That's what is called controlled conditions. And I place the definition here. Control conditions are aspects of the body that need to be controlled and maintained, like heart rate, like our heart rate, our blood pressure, acidity in the blood, glucose levels, body temperature, breathing rate. Okay, so let's sink in for a minute. Controlled conditions are anything in our body that needs to be maintained. It needs to be maintained. Okay, all right. Now, what are the receptors in our bodies? What are the receptors? So the receptors are macromolecules. They're also cells and organs that are able to become active in response to nerve impulses. Some examples are, for instance, the receptors for odorants and the olfactory system. Any stress that changes a control condition is called a stimulus. So the receptors in our body, they're everywhere in our body. And these are basically macromolecules, cells, organs, tissues, muscles, anything that will help to detect, is going to help to detect the stimulus, the stress that I was talking about earlier. Okay? So when your body is under stress, again, stress is not negative all the time. I want you to understand that stress is actually a good thing, because when our body senses the stress, it goes to our rescue, right? So imagine if you don't have stress, you will not know that your body is getting really, 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 really hot, and then you're dead. Stress is the receptors in our body that helps us to bring us back to that homeostasis stage. And they're all over our body, okay? They work together with our hormones, they work together with our central nervous system. But those are the receptors, and I want you to understand what it means when I say receptors, okay? So the receptors in our body, they will detect, they are sensitive to the stress or the stimulus. A stimulus is anything that causes stress. Anything that changes in our environment, either outside or outside in our bodies, is a stimulus, is a stimulation, okay? All right, so let's go and review the control center then, because remember, we do have 3 components in the feedback system loops: control center, receptor, and effector. So right now we're looking into the control center, right? The control center is the one that receives the information about the status of a control condition. So if my heart rate is pumping really, 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 really hard and really fast, and is under a lot of stress, then the control center will receive the information from the receptors, right? And it's going to control that condition. So think about it like in the airport. You have the traffic tower, I don't know what's called, where they control the airplanes and they control who's landing, who is departing, right? Well, that's the control center, sort of how it works in our bodies. So most of the time, that control center is located in the brain. But it's really our nervous system, is all together our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system, okay? So that is what the control center is. Now let's move forward with the second component of the feedback system loops, which is the receptors. I did mention already back here what the receptors are. Again, they're macromolecules, cells, tissue, muscles, right? Our nervous system has our nerve cells. That is a great example of a receptor. These are the macromolecules in our body that are sensitive to the stimuli, okay? All right, so now let's look a little bit deeper into the function of the receptors. Basically, receptors monitor changes in the body and sends the information to the control center. We call these input. Okay, so basically the receptors will go ahead and detect, oh, the heart rate is way too fast, and then it sends those signals to the control center. It sends those inputs to the control center. That's the receptor. All right. Now let's talk about the effectors. So the effectors in our body is basically the part of our central nervous system that receives that information and process it. And they basically say, oh my goodness, we need to take care of that heart. We need right now it's an emergency, we need to bring that heartbeat down. We need to slow it down. So that is called the output, okay, from the control center. It basically produces a response, an effect. That's why it's called effectors or effector. All right. All right. So I hope that now you understand these three components of the feedback system loop. We have the control center, the receptor, and the effector. All right. Okay. Good. So let's move forward. I want to give you an example of a negative feedback loop. Let me just real quick classify a negative feedback loop and a positive feedback loop. So, I was telling you before, we have two different feedback loops, right? The positive and the negative. The negative feedback loop is the loops or the system that is in constant occurrence for homeostasis in our bodies. It's happened every minute, every hour, every day, okay? So that is called negative feedback loop. But the positive feedback loop is the one that does not occur constantly. It occurs when every now and then, and there are basically shocks of trauma to our body. Like for instance, if you are in a car accident and you're bleeding to death, that is a positive feedback loop, meaning our system, our body goes into like turbo mode, and it has to make sure that it keeps our body alive. So it will actually shut down certain mechanisms in our body to help us survive. Now, this positive feedback loop is very dangerous, and if the system, our body or organism cannot bring us back to normal, to homeostasis, then you can die. Okay, so that is the positive feedback loop. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and look at this example of a negative feedback loop. Remember, the negative feedback loops are the loops that are constantly happening in your body. They're constantly happening. They're happening right now to bring you back to that balance, okay? All right, so I make this example as when we go exercising, okay? If you don't exercise, you're about to go into a very extreme physical activity that is gonna make you sweat. I don't know if it's gardening for you or if it's cycling for you, hiking. Just picture in your mind that you're doing this, you're about to do this extreme, hard physical activity. Okay. All right. So what happens here? I want you to understand, first things first is the stimulus is happening. All right. Now remember, the stimulus is basically the stress that we put on our bodies. It's the change in the environment, either outside or inside, that it's occurring. In this case, is the movement of our muscles, right? We're starting to go pretty fast, and we're starting to do our run or whatever. So that is the number one thing that happens in this feedback loop. Then we do have this, remember I was telling you about the receptors, okay? So we have these receptors in our body sending signals to the control center, right? Why? Because the body temperature in our bodies is going to start to rise. It's going to start rising. So the controlled condition, which is the body temperature, remember we have a lot of controlled conditions like heart rate, breathing, glucose. I'm trying to think of something else, but you get the point, right? The control condition is disturbed. My body temperature now is rising, right? Okay. So the receptors are going to start, which are all over our bodies, right? The thermal heat receptors in our body are going to start to send input in our brain, basically into our control center. they're going to start sending signals. Hey, we were having an issue here. Our body temperature is rising. Hello. That's basically what's happening. So then that's what we are here, right? Then to the control center receives that input information, and it decides to provide the effect or the effectors. The brain is going to respond to the heat receptors, right, by sending signals to the secretion sweat glands. We have glands in our body that secrete sweat. So this is basically how it works. So our brain receives this input and sends the output, which is the effectors, the sweat glands, and starts to say, activate right now. We're having an issue. The body temperature is rising. So this is when the effectors start to work, and they create a response. They create a response, an effect. The sweat band starts to work. We start sweating, right? We're going to start sweating. If you sweat a lot, you're probably already in a lot of sweat. And then that sweat, it starts to evaporate, bringing our body temperature down. So when this happens, right, it's right here, we go back to and we return to the homeostasis stage, because we have reversed the original stimulus. Our body has successfully reversed the stress. So that is the negative feedback loop. This is a perfect example of a negative feedback loop. Okay, and I place this picture here so you guys kind of understand the sequence of what's happening. And this is constantly happening in our bodies, even when you're sleeping. So that's why it's called negative. Okay, think about it that way. Okay. All right. Now, positive feedback system, this occurs where conditions do not require continual fine tuning. Like I said before, they don't need, this only happens, the positive feedback loops only happen when extremely catastrophic trauma happens to our bodies. Positive feedback tends to intensify a control condition. Remember, the control conditions are our heart rate, our breathing, all of those conditions that are basically keeping us alive. So when a positive feedback loop happens, instead of bringing that heartbeat down or that body temperature down to normal, it's actually going to increase the heartbeat. It's going to intensify that controlled condition. They usually are shut off by some mechanism outside the body. So if our system, our body cannot bring us back to a homeostasis, our body is going to start going into survival mode. And sometimes to do that and for us to survive, it's going to start to shut down some organs in our body, okay? And sometimes this could be fatal. So most feedback systems are negative in our body, right? Like I was saying, but positive feedback systems can be destructive and result in various disorders. Think about it. Think about the example of a convulsion or a stroke. Stroke survivors, they survive, but they might have consequences, or they end up having a chronic disease, or they cannot function like they used to, right? So this could be very, very bad for some people. So positive feedback loops can be destructive, yes, and result in various disorders, yes. Yet some are normal and beneficial. Like, I'm going to give the example again. If you're in a car accident and you're bleeding a lot and you almost like you're losing a lot of blood, our bodies will go into the survivor mode, and it's going to start doing what is called the clotting in our blood. And this actually might prevent the bleeding, saving your life, right? So like I said before, not all stress or a stimulus is bad. It's actually good because our body they go into this survivor mode, like I said, to help us survive, right? Or for instance, another example of a positive feedback loop is the birth of a child. A woman who is giving birth is in labor, it is not possible for her own strength to give birth to that baby because the pain is excruciating. If you're a man, let me just explain it to you in the best way that I can describe labor pains. I'm a mom, I have 2 boys, and I gave birth to my boys in the natural way. No medicine, no surgery, nothing. I felt everything. And let me tell you that labor pains are like a machete coming in your stomach and cutting you in half. That's how it feels. And then the machete going down through your, you know where. That's how it feels. It's horrible. I actually did pass out on my first baby. When I was giving birth to my first child, I passed out because of the pain. So let me tell you that giving birth is a perfect example for a positive feedback loop because our body will give us that strength as women to push that child through the birth canal. It will. And it's all by the mighty hand of God, I tell you, and the powerful mechanism that we have in our bodies, which is homeostasis, right? Which is this positive feedback loop that I'm talking about. So I want you to understand that even though positive feedback loops are not happening all the time in our bodies, thank goodness we have them in our system as a mechanism to help us survive in very, very extreme situations, okay? So that is my example of a feedback system loop. I wasn't planning to go that personal, but I did, and I'm okay with that because it's the truth. All right, now I have a question for you guys. What are 2 differences between negative and positive feedback loop? What are the differences between the negative and positive feedback systems? Who will be a brave person who will come up and speak? Okay. It's fine. You don't have to. If you're shy, I will just give you the answer. So number 1, the negative system, basically the loop response, this is the one that reverses the original stimulus, right? And the positive enhances the stimulus. So that is one difference between the 2. The negative feedback system loop is the one who is going to bring us back into that balance. And the positive is sometimes it's impossible to bring you back to that balance. So it's going to start intensifying the actual control condition. Now, the second difference between the 2 is that the negative feedback system loop is frequent. It's constantly happening in our bodies, even when we're sleeping. Remember I said that? So it's constantly happening to bring us back into that homeostasis stage. And like I said before, even though this is a stress that's happening in our bodies, not all the time is a bad stress. It's actually good, right? Like if you're walking and you sense something sharp, you don't have any footwear, or you're walking barefoot on the grass, and all of a sudden you sense like something sharp, your body automatically will jump back and say, okay, I cannot walk that direction. That is actually a negative feedback loop that our body is monitoring all of that stimuli, and it will help us to survive, right? But the positive feedback system loop is involved with conditions that do not occur often. So that's another difference. They do not occur in a day in a constant in the constant basis. And because they are not happening all the time, well, they don't require continual tuning, right? They don't require continual tuning. So those are the two differences between the two, the negative feedback and the positive feedback. All right. So that's it for today. I want to go ahead and just give you a little bit of heads up. I thought that this will be fun for me to give you, what are we going to be talking about next week? Well, next week, we're going to talk about the relationship between these two feedback systems. How do they relate? How do they work together, right? So we're going to look at two examples, which is the blood pressure, and we're going to look at labor contractions. I promise not to be too graphic. Okay. All right. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week. Also, we're going to be talking about, again, homeostasis in the body, a continuous battle for balance, and how essential oils work in our body in homeostasis, and how it relates, right, to these two feedback system loops of in our body, the positive and the negative, or the negative and the positive. That's basically it for today, you guys. Thank you so much. Here are my resources where I'm getting my information, and where I'm getting what I'm actually teaching you today and just going through. Please follow me on my social media if you're interested. My group name is I for Isadora doTERRA, and it's the I and the O. You will be able to find me on Facebook. I am also on Instagram as I doTERRA, lower score number 1. And obviously, you have my email through Eventbrite if you found me there. And you can go ahead and email me if you have any questions. I'm here to help. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Bye. See you next week.